This is the greatest move in all of chess. It's formally known as the Kadas Opening, but informally known, jokingly coined by me, as the Plow. I've also seen it called the Wide Receiver, the Sideburn, the Beaver's Claw, the Hammer, with this one being the Anvil, and the best of all, the ultimate Chad move. And I had to Google that one, who is this Chad guy? That took me down a rabbit hole, questioning my very existence.
Who am I?
But we'll run with it. And Magnus's opponent here is at the cutting edge of modern plow theory and plays the reverse plow, pawn to h5. His opponent is 21 years old, not scared. He's Jung Min Seo, Korean heritage I believe, but playing in Sweden. And he's an international master, but a blitz beast, as you can see by his rating. So Magnus goes e4, and now we get e5, the copycat variation. Well known to lead to a draw. Just keep copying the moves. No, that's a joke for newer players. If you keep copying, you'll lose very quickly. So Magnus goes knight f3. We get knight c6 and bishop c4. An Italian game, but with these moves inserted. But there's nothing boring about this opening, in case you're thinking it's heading that way. This game turns into a real battle, and there's an exquisite finish to come. So bishop e7 played, a more defensive deployment, looking at potential knight jumps. Magnus now goes d4, very aggressive, shades of the Scotch game. We get captures and c3. Is Magnus about to go full Danish gambit mode? Let black munch on the connect 3 pawns? Well, we'll never know, because d3 was played. Now, it's a weird looking move to the untrained eye, but the idea is you don't capture and allow white to rapidly develop when you're still quite undeveloped. And this knight is now never coming to c3. It takes so long to prepare. And Magnus doesn't touch the pawn. He goes queen b3. What's that all about? Well, he says, I'll pick that one up later. In the meantime, I've got bigger fish to fry, the sturgeon over here on e8. And how do you defend that square? If d5, the bishop takes. So knight h6 was played, but now bishop takes, rook captures, and the bishop crashes through. We're 9 moves in, and Magnus has once again successfully employed the plow. This guy is nuts with his openings, right? So we get knight b to d2. Magnus not afraid of knight a5, chasing the queen, defending the bishop, because he can always counterattack that knight on a5. So we get d6. Now Magnus decides to get that bishop out of dodge. We see knight a5, chasing the queen. And there's an interesting thing here, because after c6, chasing the bishop back, black does pick up that very pesky sniper, the pawn recaptures, and now interestingly, after d5, black's actually doing alright, despite this king being a bit drafty, because they've got the bishop pair here, the bishop's opening up, board's opening up, and this rook's pretty active. So Magnus goes queen d4, looking at this pawn, we get captures, and now here you'll see the evaluation bar on the left do a reaction, because the computer wants to take this pawn as the top move. But what human plays that? Running into rook e6, skewering queen to king. Now the computer says you can go e5, f4 supporting the knight, you're doing fine. But in blitz, that's not a move you want to play. So Magnus takes off the queens. He is the endgame goat, as they say. Look at the evaluation bar react. Black is now better. We see bishop recaptures and knight takes. Now rook e6 could have been played, but then this knight comes to d2, defends. You can use the f-pawn if needed. White holds on, but that was the best move. But bishop f5 played. This knight now retreats here. It's got no forward jump because of this rook. So knight g3, now bishop g4, what was that all about? Why not do it in one go? Well, you sent this knight to a more passive square, and after castles from Magnus, rook d6 was best to cover this pawn. But instead, we see bishop takes on f3, shattering the pawns. The computer, not a fan. It now says says white is better. You know, the bishop pair should have been preserved in that position. It was more powerful than damaged pawns. But black wants to target these dark squared ones. So bishop b6 played, Magnus takes here, we see a swap like for like, it's now 5 pawns each, but knight e4. And Magnus is doing well now. That is a bit of a centralized monster. On an outpost, the bishop kicked back, and knights are very tricky. All kinds of maneuvers that can start coming into play now. So rook d7 played, targeting the b pawn, and this is classic play from a strong player. Don't defend it meekly, go on some active counterplay, ditch a pawn. By the way, the computer did offer that as a possible move, but this is what the strong guys will generally do, especially in Blitz. So king c2, activate the king in the endgame, plus you prophylactically step off the dark squares. Now we get this rook challenging Magnus's active one. Trade off your opponent's active pieces, they say. Magnus checks, the rook drops back. No repetition from Magnus. He takes off those rooks, and now we get b4. Magnus using that extra pawn and keeping an eye on these breaks by the black player. So we get rook e5 played, supporting the pawn breaks. c4 from Magnus, a5. He could immediately capture. He goes for this one. The bishop drops. Now he takes on a5. And after bishop captures, Magnus does something weird. He's got 2 minutes on the clock. He's an endgame genius, always knows the right piece to pick up, but here he should go king d3, preparing to support this c pawn. But he goes rook a1, encouraging the bishop to attack the pawn, and it's a cardinal sin. Never improve your opponent's pieces, you know, help them activate. Because although you activate your own rook, you can't now defend this pawn, it's dropping off the board. Now Magnus goes with the king, but the pawn drops and the position is level. But Magnus does not start liquidating. He's the stronger player, wants to win. So rook a5, targets the bishop. It drops to e7, no it doesn't, sorry, check first, king goes. Now it drops to e7, I knew it was coming. The pawn is targeted and Magnus doesn't liquidate. He could take here, pawn recaptures, win this one, but then ditch this one. It's 2 on 2. Tough to win, even with the outside b pawn. So Magnus keeps the rooks on, excuse me, and now we see bishop takes on h4, rook takes, rook e5, and Magnus starts pushing that b pawn. Push 'em, baby, as Yasser Serwan would say. By the way, he should be back in commentary today. Big tournament kicking off in St. Louis, Rapid and Blitz, lots of stars in action. Hit subscribe if you haven't already to never miss my future recaps. And now we see this bishop drop back to d8, coming in front of the b pawn. But one thing I want to point out, bishop e7 was stronger because it stops a future knight c5, and in general when bishops sit 2 squares in front of a knight like this, they dominate half of that knight's jumps. Really, really nice. So you've only ever got backwards jumps, or else you're going to be captured. But we see bishop d8, the pawn is pushed. King d7, harassing the rook, so you can't yet go b6, or the rook drops. So we see check, king sidesteps, check, the king back. Magnus doesn't repeat, he now goes with knight c5 check. King e8 played, and that pawn pushes to such an extent that black has to give up the bishop just to stop Magnus from making a baby girl. So the rook recaptures. White a whole knight up here, right? But rook f5 comes, the pawn is targeted, and if black can liquidate just that one pawn, it's a theoretical draw. You know, imagine all the pawns gone, rook and knight versus rook is a draw. So it's targeted. Magnus defends, g5, g4 coming to liquidate, and now this is just exquisite from Magnus. So he goes knight e6. What happens now if you push on with g4? Well, there's a nasty fork in the air. Knights are tricky. You can fill in the blank. And so that's why you can't push. There's knight g7, check, winning the rook. So king e7 played, but now knight d4, centralizing. Always centralize your pieces where you can. The rook hit, comes into f4, and now this is awesome from Magnus. You know, there's a best move here that seals the deal, but there's so many ways to go wrong. Because, for example, if you check and drive in the king some way. Well, now, after king d5, g4 comes, and black is achieving that goal that they're looking for, without keeping on clicking here. So, what does Magnus do? King d5, and now after g4, he's in time with king e5. He makes the very tricky just look simple. These aren't easy concepts. Now, when the rook goes, well, he's not actually going to be losing this pawn. We're going to see. Now, the best move was rook f7. Why? Because after this kind of mating attack, the king slithers out to here. But still, it's tough to hold on after f4. White keeps the pawn on. But king f8 was played, rook f8. And now there's check, and look at the barrier that the king forms with the rook. And if this king comes to d8, well, now there's knight c6 check. If the king comes back, that's mate. Can't quite remember the name of this mate. It's probably got a name. I don't think it's Anastasia's. Something different. And if the king comes this way, well, now you pick up the rook, and that is a lost game. So the king stepped back to e8, not d8, but now simply king e6, and we saw resignation because the checkmate is coming. If you try and sidestep, well, then still check, again win the rook. That king is in such a bad spot, it's dead lost. Magnus plows ahead once again with this move. I absolutely love it. I hope you enjoyed this game. Do check out the video on screen for another awesome game in this variation. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.